When everything breaks apart, it does not all come tumbling down at once. The small things, the silent indicators, are what gradually wears you down. That night, I waited for Samantha to arrive home. Midnight had passed, and my patience was wearing thin. She had gone out with her pals, claiming to need some space. When the door creaked open, and I saw her, my stomach sank. Her hair was disheveled like she had been caught in a storm. Her clothes were torn at the edges, hanging loosely, and there was something else. Something I couldn't ignore. A faint, unmistakable wetness on her thighs. I froze. The air around her smelled of cologne, but not hers, not mine. Someone else's, a stranger's. I helped her into bed after cleaning her up. "What happened, Sam?" I asked, trying to sound calm, trying to convince myself there was an explanation. But her eyes, glassy, unfocused, refused to meet mine. She mumbled through the haze of alcohol, her words making my chest tighten. It didn't mean anything. Just once. I'm sorry, her words hit me harder than anything I had ever felt. Sorry for what? I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but I couldn't. Not then. Not while she was like this. I swallowed the lump in my throat, tucked her in, and walked out of the room. My heart wanted to hope, but my gut whispered the truth. Something had happened. Something I wasn't sure I could forgive. The next morning, when the alcohol had worn off, I was determined to get my answers. And I had a feeling I wasn't ready for the truth. The morning after is when reality sets in. Samantha woke up groaning, clutching her head as if it might split open. I could hear her moving around the room, probably trying to piece together the fragments of the night before. Meanwhile, I was already in the kitchen, sitting in silence, staring at the undeniable evidence. I hadn't slept. My mind wouldn't stop replaying her slurred words, the smell of cologne, the things I'd seen. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed the truth. She walked in, still wearing the wrinkled clothes from the night before. Her eyes were red and tired, and she looked at me, confused, until she saw the photos on the table. There they were, proof I couldn't deny. A close-up of the stains on her dress and a faint but visible handprint near her waist. I had taken those photos the night before. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I just needed to document what I couldn't yet process. "Do you even remember what you did last night?" I asked, my voice trembling, not from anger but from the ache deep in my chest. Her face fell, and I saw it. The panic, the guilt, the realization. She didn't need to ask what I was talking about. She already knew. Samantha broke down right there in the kitchen, her shoulders shaking as tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake." Her words sliced through me, sharp and cold. "A mistake?" I said, cutting her off. "You didn't just trip and fall into this. You chose it. You walked into that bar, got drunk, and let another man sleep with you." She tried to explain, tried to justify her actions with the state she was in, but I wasn't buying it. Her tears didn't move me anymore. They felt hollow, just like the excuses she was making. That was when it hit me. She wasn't just apologizing to me. She was trying to make herself feel better. And that was what hurt the most. She didn't fully understand the damage she had done to us, to our marriage. I couldn't listen anymore. I stood up, looked her in the eyes, and said, "I need some air." Then I walked out, leaving her alone with the wreckage she'd created. You can't just let something like this go. Not when your trust has been shattered. Not when every part of you is screaming for the truth. I tried. God knows I tried to push it out of my mind, but the questions kept eating away at me. Who was he? Why her? And most of all, how long had this been going on? I began with Samantha's drunken confession. Her words had been vague and scattered, but there was enough for me to piece things together. A name. Adam. That was all I needed to start digging. It didn't take long to find him with social media. Connecting the dots is easy when you're determined. Adam was exactly the kind of man you'd picture. Polished, successful, and oozing charm. The type who could talk his way into or out of anything. But what struck me harder was something worse. Samantha followed him, and he followed her back. This wasn't some random, nameless stranger. They knew each other. One detail caught me completely off guard. Adam was married. Not just married, he had children. His social media was filled with pictures of a seemingly perfect family. Vacation snapshots, birthday celebrations, and cozy Sunday mornings at home were all proudly displayed on his Instagram. He looked like a man who had it all. But then again, so had I. And look where that had gotten me. The deeper I looked, the more the puzzle pieces began to fit. I needed to know how far this connection went. Samantha's phone became my next target. She didn't realize I was watching, but I had to uncover the full story. Late at night, while she slept, I unlocked it. That's when I found the messages. They were short, casual, but damning. Adam knew she'd be at the bar that night. Their conversation was light, just enough to set the scene. He showed up because he knew she would be there. This wasn't a random encounter. It was orchestrated. My hands trembled as I read their exchanges. The texts weren't lengthy, but they didn't need to be. The evidence was clear. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment lapse in judgment. It was deliberate. Perhaps they hadn't spelled everything out explicitly, but it was enough to see they both knew exactly what they were doing. That night, I made a decision. Adam's wife deserved to know the truth about the man she had married. She needed to see what kind of person he truly was. And after I dealt with him, I would turn my focus back to Samantha. The divorce papers were already in the works. But I needed closure before I could fully walk away. I had the name. I had the evidence. And now, I had a plan. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. If my marriage was crumbling, his wouldn't be left unscathed. I wrestled with the decision of whether or not to contact his wife, Charlotte. Some might argue it wasn't my place, but I didn't see it that way. She had a right to know, just as I did. So, I reached out. Carefully, I crafted a message explaining that I needed to discuss something important with her. She responded the same day, and we agreed to meet at a small, quiet cafe downtown, a neutral space where emotions wouldn't spiral out of control. Charlotte was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table. Her appearance was understated, dark hair tied neatly into a ponytail, a simple outfit, and an air of nervousness. She looked confused, maybe a little apprehensive, but she greeted me politely, offering a faint smile as I introduced myself. Her eyes lit up when she mentioned Adam, and I could see the love she had for him. That made what I was about to do even harder. I didn't soften the blow when I spoke to her. "Your husband had an affair with my wife," I said plainly. The polite smile on her face disappeared instantly, replaced by disbelief. Her hands trembled slightly as she lowered her coffee cup to the table. For a moment she didn't respond, just stared at me as though the words I'd spoken couldn't possibly be real. I reached into my bag and pulled out the evidence I'd gathered. Screenshots of their text exchanges, time-stamped photos from that night, and even a secret recording where my wife confessed his name. I gave her a moment to absorb each piece. As she picked up the photos and listened to the recording, her complexion turned pale. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. She sat frozen, her lips quivering as she struggled to process it all. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky but resolute. "Thank you for telling me." I nodded, standing to leave. There was nothing more to say. As I exit the coffee shop, a storm of emotions swirled within me. Anger, relief, and even guilt. What happened between Adam and Charlotte after this was no longer my concern. My priority was reclaiming control of my life, which meant severing ties with Samantha and the life we once shared. Back at home, everything felt different. The house no longer felt like home, and Samantha was a shadow of herself. Self-guilt weighed heavily on her. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she carried herself. She tried desperately to fix the damage she had done. At first, there were tears. She cried every day, pleading with me to listen, to let her explain, to give her another chance. "I'll do anything," she said. "Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes." But every time I looked at her, all I could see was a betrayal. She started leaving notes, tiny slips of paper tucked into my coat pockets or placed on my pillow. "I love you. I'll never hurt you again. Please don't give up on us." For a while I read them, then I stopped. She began cooking dinner every night, making my favorite dishes, hoping it would bring us closer, but I couldn't sit across from her at the table and pretend everything was fine. It wasn't. A part of me wanted to believe her. I wanted to forgive her, to salvage the life we had spent years building together. But every time I thought of her with someone else, the knot in my stomach tightened. The trust we had, the respect we shared, it was all gone. One evening, she confronted me in the living room. Her face was swollen from crying, her voice hoarse. "Please, Brad," she whispered. "I love you. I'll do anything to fix this." For the first time in days, I truly looked at her. "I don't think so," I said, my voice low but firm. The impact of my words hit her like a physical blow. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her chest as though the pain was too much to bear. Maybe, in that moment, she felt even a fraction of the anguish she had caused me. For the next few days, the house was eerily silent. There were no arguments, no shouting matches, just the suffocating weight of everything she had done hanging in the air. I had hoped, even just a little, that the quiet might bring clarity, that maybe somehow we could find a way to mend what had been broken. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Some things can't be fixed. During those days, I focused on tying up loose ends. I reviewed our financial accounts, sorted through important documents, and prepared for what was inevitable. I reflected on every moment we had shared, the highs, the lows, and questioned if it was enough to hold on. That morning I walked into the living room where Samantha was sitting, her eyes fixed on the floor as if the answers she desperately sought might appear there. When she noticed me, her tear-swollen eyes met mine, her face etched with exhaustion and desperation. I held the divorce papers in my hand, hesitating briefly. It wasn't because I doubted my decision, but because I knew this would mark the true end of everything. "You made your choice that night," I said, my tone steady and resolute. "This is mine." I placed the papers on the coffee table in front of her. The weight of my words hit her visibly. Her entire body went rigid, and her trembling hands reached for the papers. "Brad, no, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." She dropped to her knees, clutching my hand, sobbing so hard it seemed she might choke on her own grief. "Don't do this," she begged. "Please don't throw us away." But the reality was, she had already thrown it away. In one selfish act, she had shattered the foundation of trust we'd spent years building. And without trust, what was left? I gently pulled my hand free, though my resolve didn't waver. "I can't," I replied, shaking my head slowly. "I've tried, Sam. I've thought about it every possible way, but I can't see the same way anymore. I can't see us the same." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The finality in my words spoke volumes. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her crumpled on the floor, her sobs echoing behind me. A strange mix of emotions settled over me as I left. Grief, certainly, but also a sense of relief. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't the ending I had hoped for, but it was the one I needed. Some decisions leave scars too deep to heal, and hers was one of them. It's strange how the conclusion of something that once meant the world can feel so empty. Yet, that was my reality. I left that marriage a free man, though freedom wasn't what I had imagined. For weeks, I couldn't even set foot in our bedroom. The scent of her lingered there, tied to memories I didn't want to relive. I slept on the couch instead, but gradually things began to shift. I stopped focusing on the empty spaces she once occupied and started envisioning new possibilities. I replaced the furniture, rearranged the living room, and even painted the walls a fresh color. It was my way of reclaiming the space, of saying, "This is mine now." I wasn't just rebuilding the house, I was rebuilding myself. The cracks she left behind didn't disappear, and the scars remained, but they started to ache less over time. In their place, I found something I hadn't felt in years: peace. As for Samantha, I don't know where life took her. Once the papers were signed, we stopped communicating. I heard bits and pieces, how she struggled to move on, how life wasn't easy for her. People like to say that time heals all wounds, but I don't believe that. Time doesn't erase pain. It simply teaches you how to live with it, how to grow around it. For me, that meant learning to embrace solitude. I'd rather spend my days in quiet contentment than in a marriage overshadowed by betrayal. And as for Samantha, I hope she finds a way to live with her choices. Not for my sake, but for her own. In the end, we both lost something. I lost a wife I thought I knew, and she lost a life we'd built together. But the difference is, I gained something far more valuable. I found myself, and that, above all, was worth every painful step.